Reactionaries and right-wingers love to clamor on about personal liberty and scream, freedom, from the top of their lungs, but what freedom are they talking about? And is communism, in contrast, an ideology of unfreedom? As Karl Marx puts it in his 1848 public speech delivered before the Democratic Association of Brussels. Gentlemen, do not allow yourselves to be deluded by the abstract word freedom. Whose freedom? It is not the freedom of one individual in relation to another, but the freedom of capital to crush the worker. Liberal democracies propagate the facade of liberty and individual rights while concealing the true essence of their rule, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. This is a mechanism by which the capitalist class as a whole dictates the course of society, politics, and the economy to secure their dominance. Capital holds sway over institutions, media, and influential positions, manipulating public opinion and consolidating its control over the levers of power. The illusion of democracy the bourgeoisie creates is carefully curated to maintain the existing power structures and perpetuate the subjugation of the masses. Freedom under capitalism is similarly illusory. It is freedom for capital, not freedom for people. Ho Chi Minh says in his 1959 report on the draft amended constitution, that capitalists often boast that their constitutions guarantee the rights of the individual, democratic liberties, and the interests of all citizens. But in reality, only the bourgeoisie enjoy the rights recorded in these constitutions. The working people do not really enjoy democratic freedoms. They are exploited all their life and have to bear heavy burdens in the service of the exploiting class. The freedom the reactionaries cry for, then, is merely that freedom which liberates capital and enslaves the worker. J.V. Stalin comments on this in his 1936 work titled, On the Draft Constitution of the USSR, saying, "They speak of the equality of citizens, but forget that there cannot be real equality between employer and workman, between landlord and peasant, if the former possess wealth and political weight in society while the latter are deprived of both, if the former are exploiters while the latter are exploited." Or again, they speak of freedom of speech, assembly, and the press, but forget that all these liberties may be merely a hollow sound for the working class, if the latter cannot have access to suitable premises for meetings, good printing shops, a sufficient quantity of printing paper, etc. What freedom do the poor enjoy under capitalism? Capitalism requires a reserve army of labor in order to keep wages low, and that necessarily means that many people must be deprived of life's necessities in order to compel the rest of the working class to work more and demand less. You are free to work, and you are free to starve. That is the freedom the reactionaries talk about. In the ABC of Communism N.I. Bukharin and E. Preobrazhensky mentions that, under capitalism, the very land is all in private hands, there remains no spot unowned where an enterprise can be carried on. The freedom of the worker to sell his labor power, the freedom of the capitalist to buy it, the equality of the capitalist and the wage earner, all these are but hunger's chain which compels the laborer to work for the capitalist. All other freedoms only exist depending on the degree to which a given liberal democracy has turned towards fascism. That is to say that the working class are only given freedoms when they are inconsequential to the bourgeoisie. In Democracy and Fascism, Gramsci mentions that the freedom to organize is only conceded to the workers by the bourgeois when they are certain that the workers have been reduced to a point where they can no longer make use of it, except to resume elementary organizing work which they hope will not have political consequences other than in the very long term. But this is not freedom, this is not democracy. What good does freedom of speech do for a starving person? What good does the ability to criticize the government do for a homeless person? And as Maurice Bishop puts it, the right of freedom of expression can really only be relevant if people are not too hungry, or too tired to be able to express themselves. It can only be relevant if appropriate grassroots mechanisms rooted in the people exist, through which the people can effectively participate, can make decisions, can receive reports from the leaders and eventually be trained for ruling and controlling that particular society. This is what democracy is all about. True freedom can only be achieved through the establishment of a proletarian state, a system that truly represents the interests of the working masses, in which the means of production are collectively owned and controlled, and the fruits of labor are shared equitably among all. Only in such a society can the shackles of capitalist oppression be broken, and the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie dismantled. Despite the assertion by reactionaries to the contrary, communist revolutions invariably result in more freedoms for the people than the regimes they succeed. Michael Parenti mentions this in his 1997 work, Black Shirts and Reds, Rational Fascism and the Overthrow of Communism, saying the following. Some people conclude that anyone who utters a good word about leftist one-party revolutions must harbor anti-democratic or Stalinist sentiments. But to applaud social revolutions is not to oppose political freedom. To the extent that revolutionary governments construct substantive alternatives for their people, they increase human options and freedom. There is no such thing as freedom in the abstract. There is freedom to speak openly and iconoclastically, freedom to organize a political opposition, freedom of opportunity to get an education and pursue a livelihood, freedom to worship as one chooses or not worship at all, freedom to live in healthful conditions, freedom to enjoy various social benefits, and so on. Most of what is called freedom gets its definition within a social context. Revolutionary governments extend a number of popular freedoms without destroying those freedoms that never existed in the previous regimes. They foster conditions necessary for national self-determination, economic betterment, the preservation of health and human life, and the end of many of the worst forms of ethnic, patriarchal, and class oppression. Regarding patriarchal oppression, consider the vastly improved condition of women in revolutionary Afghanistan and South Yemen before the counter-revolutionary repression in the 1990s, or in Cuba after the 1959 revolution as compared to before. U.S. policymakers argue that social revolutionary victory anywhere represents a diminution of freedom in the world. The assertion is false. The Chinese Revolution did not crush democracy, there was none to crush in that oppressively feudal regime. The Cuban Revolution did not destroy freedom, it destroyed a hateful US-sponsored police state. The Algerian Revolution did not abolish national liberties, precious few existed under French colonialism. The Vietnamese revolutionaries did not abrogate individual rights, no such rights were available under the US-supported puppet governments of Bao Dai, Diem, and Cai. Of course, revolutions do limit the freedoms of the corporate propertied class and other privileged interests, the freedom to invest privately without regard to human and environmental costs, the freedom to live in obscene opulence while paying workers starvation wages, the freedom to treat the state as a private agency in the service of a privileged coterie, the freedom to employ child labor and child prostitutes, the freedom to treat women as chattel, and so on. The whole point of communism is to liberate the working class. But we did not build this society in order to restrict personal liberty but in order that the human individual may feel really free. We built it for the sake of real personal liberty, liberty without quotation marks. It is difficult for me to imagine what personal liberty is enjoyed by an unemployed person, who goes about hungry, and cannot find employment. Real liberty can exist only where exploitation has been abolished, where there is no oppression of some by others, where there is no unemployment and poverty, where a man is not haunted by the fear of being tomorrow deprived of work, of home and of bread. Only in such a society is real, and not paper, personal and every other liberty possible. J. V. Stalin. 1936, interview between J. Stalin and Roy Howard.